So the question is, who is the neuroscientist and who is the juggler? Who thinks that I am the neuroscientist? Yeah, my two friends in the back, thank you very much. So congratulations, you all got that correct.
Yes, but the question is obviously, how did you guess? So anyone, how? Because so anyone, you sir? Fluency. Yes, exactly. And so one of the main things is that even though Harm and I are doing the same task, and it looks exactly the same on the outside, right? Actually, on the inside, what's going on in our brains is completely different. If I can have a slide over there. Then this is our brains, right? And this is the part of the brain that I'm basically using for juggling. This is the conscious part, the cortex, where I'm really thinking ball by ball what's going on. This is the part where you do all the automated movements, all the automated stuff. This is what Harm is using. For Harm, juggling is like riding a bicycle, and he can actually literally do this with his eyes closed, right?
Yes, I hope.
Yeah, so I'm obviously not even going to try that, because that would be slightly embarrassing. So I teach a lot of neuroscience. I teach a lot about the brain, about learning. And actually one of the things I do is I give my students homework to get some juggling balls and to learn to juggle within a week. And I ask them to keep a diary, and I have some quotes over here. And what's clear from these quotes is that these students struggle with two different things. So one of them is the rhythm. So one of the quotes is, and actually this is in Dutch, but I'll translate it on the spot. The timing of the throwing of the ball is the most important and the hardest part of all, which rhymes just because I translated it like that. The other thing that students notice a lot is that it's not so much the rhythm, but it's actually the accuracy of throwing. So what a student would say is, I notice that I find it very hard to throw accurately, and throughout the week, the balls I'm throwing, they're actually going in any sort of direction. So I wonder, Harm, you as a professional juggler, whether you notice that as well, that both timing and accuracy are issues doing this.
Yes, yeah, obviously they are the most important. They are the key aspects of juggling. And actually, as a juggler, actually there's two kinds of jugglers. There's the throwers and there's the catchers. Me, I'm a thrower, which means that I spend silly amounts of time practicing things like this, practicing how to throw a ball as accurately as possible. So I do exercises like this, or maybe like I take 5 balls and I have my 5-ball pattern, and then I think, okay, let's see if I can jog at the same time, just to make it more accurate. And as you can see, my pattern is quite stable. That's because I spent this silly amount of time trying to get everything as perfect as possible. But there's also catchers, and those are people that maybe they throw a little bit less accurate, so that one ball goes a little bit higher, or they lean a bit to one side, and then they vary their throws. But they still keep the pattern going just because they don't spend that time on the pre-exercise. They just spend time doing the actual thing.
Yeah, so the fascinating part is here, how do you actually go from the consciously throwing one ball by the other to doing it much more automatized in the cerebellum. And that's where the next slide kicks in. Because this is very zoomed in on a cellular level, what's going on in your brain when you are learning a motor task. So what you see over here is a so-called Purkinje cell. And the Purkinje cell are the sole output cells of this structure, the cerebellum, the tiny brain in the back of your head that's doing automated things. And each Purkinje cell actually receives information from 100,000 different cells in your brain, and they're really bombarding that with all kinds of information. So this can be visual information from what you're seeing, proprioceptive information that just described about where your arms are. I'm sure that your balance is in there as well. And then you can see this extra structure over here, the so-called climbing fiber. And what the climbing fiber does is it carries an error signal. And basically, in the case of juggling, what's going on is that this climbing fiber, every time that Harm drops a ball, this climbing fiber will become very, very active. And what it does is it will actually kill some of the connections that are there towards the Purkinje cells. And it's going to kill those connections that were active just prior to the actual error that you made. So we have 100,000 different connections. And every time you make an error, some of these connections, the ones that were responsible for making the errors, are taken out. And then simply by, like a sculpture, you're carving a pathway over there with just the connections that do not make errors for the task at hand. And what then happens is obviously that you have the right pattern, and this really becomes part of your whole structure. So at the cellular level, making errors is crucial. It's the only way to properly learn something and to make something completely automatic. If you cannot make errors, you will not stimulate your climbing fibers. If you don't stimulate your climbing fibers, you keep struggling like I'm struggling in the motor cortex area. And I know that you've been teaching a lot of students as well, Harm. So.
Yeah, you can actually see that also in people who want to learn how to juggle. Some of them, they don't use their climbing fibers. So what happens is they are perfectionists, there's many perfectionists, and they don't want to drop. So they do the things that they can, and they do them over and over. And then maybe if they feel safe after a long time, they try to go on. And these people, it takes them forever to learn how to juggle, whereas the people who, I don't know, just have this you only live once mentality, they get it way quicker. And this is, it's not, and actually this is not something that happens just with people who, with amateurs. It also happens in circus school that some people really want to get this trick down. So they practice this trick that they already know, but they only get it, I don't know, 9 out of 10 or 19 out of 20 times. And they practice it over and over, and they forget to practice the more difficult version where they actually drop so they can improve faster.
Yeah, so if there's one morale to the story that we're telling today is don't be afraid to make errors, because it's really the only way to progress and do something new. So if you're learning a new trick, Harm, because I'm sure that you're developing still as well, right? But there's very few people who can explain to you stuff because you're like the man, right? So
thank you.
So how do you do that? How do you learn something?
But there's many different ways of discovering or learning new tricks, but one way that I think is important to this talk is that sometimes I see a trick and I copy it. And if the trick consists of throws and catches in places that I already know, I can do it quickly. Either I just do it because it's within my skill range, I just copy it, or I can do it within a few minutes.
Yes, and that by itself is amazing because these are very complicated patterns, so they're very hard to discern from each other, to tell apart from each other. But this brings us to another part of our motor system. So this is not the automatic system, right? Because the automatic system is only when it's really carved in and learned, and this is something that Harm is still working on. But in the cortex part, in the conscious part, you have a class of cells called mirror neurons. And these mirror neurons are amazing types of cells. The examples here are in monkeys, not in Harm, but it's nonetheless, it's a very similar system. And the crazy thing about these mirror neurons is that they are active, and you can see activity over there when the monkey or Harm is performing a certain task. But the same neurons in your brain are active when you're actually watching someone else do the task. And the idea is that this is one of the reasons why primates have gone so very, very successful in evolution. Because traditional evolution, from the Darwinian point of view, you just get a little better and then you pass over your genetic material. So by generations, if you happen to be the fittest for a certain task, your species gets a little better and finds its own niche. The great thing about these mirror neurons is that you do not have to wait for this whole Darwinian process anymore, right? So you see someone do a great trick, and you think, oh, that's great. I sort of can translate what I'm seeing in this person, and I can translate it to my own movements. And so being able to learn by copying has changed evolution from so-called Darwinian to Lamarckian evolution. And this really means that developments will be increasingly fast.
also
Obviously,
means
if there's a very, very hard trick and us would look at us, it's just pure magic, right? There's no way that we know how we would actually do this. But Harm, you can do that. So how do you tell apart these very strange, big patterns?
Yeah, sorry. So actually, I've just been juggling for a while, and if you all paid attention, this should mean that you will now learn how to juggle more quickly yourself.
Yeah, you're slightly better jugglers already.
Yes. Yeah. But so how do I tell these complicated patterns apart?
Yes.
Well, as far as I understand, because I am a juggler and I've spent so much time on juggling, my brain is different. My brain has grown.
Yes.
Basically, the parts of my brain here in the back, the visual cortex, the part that process these complex visual information, in jugglers, they grow, which is amazing. So I don't know if there's more jugglers in the audience. You can raise your hand, and the people around you can take a look to see if the brains are actually bigger.
Yes.
Yeah. So what happens actually, but what does this mean? I have a nice big brain. This means that, to me, juggling patterns, they look as if they are going in slow motion. And this is a bit, this is a weird concept because, of course, they are not going in slow motion. This is the same speed for you or for me. But I can try to illustrate, and I will illustrate here first, and then I will come back to you. So if I have this pattern, it's a 4-ball pattern, it should look kind of complicated. But actually, when I move my hands apart, you'll notice that I throw 2 balls in one hand, 2 balls in the other hand. I do this at the same time, and I bring my hands together, and it looks more complicated. Right? Yeah. Okay, I'll try to show you as well. Complicated version, but I'll move my hands apart, and there's 2 balls in this hand, 2 balls in that hand, and then I move them back together. It looks more complicated. So this clarity of the patterns, as you will, this is something that happens to me as a juggler normally. So I see a pattern and it's clear. But this also means that to a juggler, the juggling that he sees looks way different than from an ordinary audience. So as a juggler, I always have to think, I am devising this wonderful routine with lots of great variations, but the audience will not see the difference between the 2 variations because they haven't seen enough juggling. Because obviously the problem is that people haven't seen enough juggling.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a fundamental problem, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we summarize, so what's special about Harm's brain? So a lot of it has been by practice and by making errors has been become automatic. And by storing it in the automatic, this opens up space for doing new tricks, doing more complicated stuff. The other thing is that his visual cortex has developed so that it appears that things are in slow motion, but actually there's major capabilities of doing this visual processing, and then that opens up the possibility to use your mirror neuron system in order to even when the patterns are very complicated, to translate that into whatever Harm wants to learn and take it from there. So ladies and gentlemen, I give you Harm over here. Thank you very much.